Hey guys, it's been a while, so I thought I'd make a video explaining as to why I haven't put out any zoo videos or talked too much on the Mtgsalvation thread for zoo. I still, keep my head in there and peek in, make sure everyone's sort of doing the best they can do as a zookeeper. But the truth of the matter is I don't really play very much zoo anymore. Real life has gotten in the way. And I've got to considerably slow down the amount of magic that I was doing beforehand. Real life kind of sucks sometimes like that. But aside from that, I actually just don't play zoo. I sometimes test it out. I still like the archetype, don't get me wrong. It's just, I gotta face an ugly truth here, which is zoo is not good in Modern. It's not. And it's tough for me to say that as like the guy who's been pushing zoo for such a long time. But the truth of the matter is it's always been an uphill battle ever since, Green Sun Zenith got banned. And it's just continuously been an uphill battle. There's just never been a point in time in Magic's history for Modern after the Green Sun Zenith ban that zoo was good. And the other decks that currently exist are not really zoo. They're zoo in the terms of, you still have a couple of the core creatures that make up zoo, but they're not exactly zoo. So you've got Suicide Zoo, which, if the name isn't clear enough, is a suicide aggro deck, not a sly deck building archetype. You have a Big Zoo, which is Collected Company Zoo, which is more of a mid-range zoo. It's a toolbox zoo. It's like Maverick. And you have Gruul Zoo, which is using Bushwhacker. And that is not even a zoo deck either. That's a rush aggro deck. None of them use the principles of Sly, which is, I think that's how you pronounce it. Look, I wasn't around in 1996. I was 6 years old. So that's the truth of the matter is it's not using that kind of archetype in building. Now, that archetype is not bad by any stretch of the imagination. It just doesn't have any cards supporting it right now. I want to show you guys something that I've worked on a little bit in my spare time, just while trying to figure out why Zoo's bad. I transitioned over to Dredge. I play Dredge, pretty much only Dredge now, because Dredge still lets me feel like the aggro player while also letting me understand why it's a tier 1 deck. It's a little refreshing to play like a tier 1 deck and then look back at Zoo and be like, oh, that's why Zoo isn't very good right now. And I'm going to explain what I've discovered by not playing Zoo has come to let me know about what's going on with Zoo. Now, what you see in front of you guys, I've got two windows over here. One is a what a good Zoo archetype deck list would be, and what goes into the Slay archetype. Here, I'll even write that down. So, what I've got to show you guys here is, and by all means, by the way, this deck list is bad. Don't think I'm telling you this is the new Zoo tech, because it's not. I'm just using existing cards to try to give an example of what I mean. But let's start with this. What the Slay aggro archetype is like. Generally, you want to use 20 lands. You can occasionally shave it down to 18, but then you're starting to get into more of a rush type of aggro. Which is not where we're trying to go here. Realistically, you got to remember that Zoo is at heart a green creature deck. It's not a red burn down deck. It's not a white hate bears type of deck. It is a creature deck. Its main color is green, and it wants to have the best beaters humanly possible, have them stick and have them turn sideways. That's what you're trying to do with this deck. So the way that you do that is you run 20 lands. It gives you the best curve that you can have for the Slay curve, which is you have pretty good easily access to 3 mana, and then it peters off from there. But the important thing is that every turn you're playing things in your hand until you're top decking. That should be the magic thing, is that you're playing everything in your hand every turn. Not all at once, you're not spewing it out, you're just playing out your hand, and then you should tap out completely and then be out of cards in hand by, I'd say, turn 5, turn 6. It's got an extended curve. You're running 20 24 creatures to 26 creatures. I would lean towards the heavier amount here. 24, 26 is probably where you want to be at, with 14 to 16 clearing spells. Now, clearing spells here can be bolts, they can be burn, they can be path, they can be pump, as long as they're clearing the way and letting your creatures do damage. We'll go further into that in a bit. Now, I broke down exactly what you want to be doing. 1 CMC, you're going to want 14 creatures at 1 CMC. It seems like a lot, but it's not. It's the amount that you do to get in order to get enough that you can play 1 always on turn 1, and that turn 2, if you don't have a 2-drop, you've got 2 in hand, so that you can play 2 more 1-drops. Or if you have a 2-drop in hand, you play the 2-drop, and then turn 3, if you don't have a 3-drop, which is likely, then you've got a 2-drop and a 1-drop, or 3 1-drops. The math just works out here from years and years and years of me playing this type of archetype. I can tell you 14 is the correct amount of creatures that you want in your 1-drop. And then as far as your clear spell goes, you want anywhere from 8 to 9. Your 2 CMC, you're going to want at least 7 creatures, and about 4 to 5 of the clear spells. The clear spells is where you're being more flexible, as the creatures is a little bit less flexible. And then 3 CMC, you'll find that you want 3 creatures, and now these creatures should be game-ending creatures, and creatures that don't die. Just clarify, game-ending creatures and creatures that don't die. And it should be anywhere from, for your clearance spells, you should have 2 to 3 in this slot. Which seems kind of crazy. Why would you spend 3 converted mana cost on a bolt, basically? But it will make sense when I go down to the breakdown for the deck. If we want to break down this deck, I've got it sorted here by converted mana cost and type. We'll get into it. Now, you're also going to note that I've got 28 creatures here, but they're not all of the beatdown creatures that I'm talking about. You'll see in a second. You've got Experiment 1, 4 of, Kytheon, 2 of, Scythe Tiger, yeah, you guys might not know this one, Scythe Tiger, 4 of, and then Wild Nicottle, 4 of. Now, I'm just going to say this blatantly. Scythe Tiger is a bad card. Don't use it. It's going to be for an example. Now, why Scythe Tiger? Because it's a 3/2 with Shroud. That's seriously the reason. Its second ability, when it enters the battlefield, you gotta sacrifice it unless you sacrifice a land, is terrible. You would never play this magic card. It's an awful, awful magic card. However, if it was just a 3/2 with Shroud, it would be fantastic for this archetype. The reason why is because you want creatures that can not only beat down, but don't go away easily, or grow significantly over time. Experiment 1 is a good example of this. Experiment 1 is actually a great card that is under-supported. If you had Scythe Tiger, you'd be doing really good in Zoo right now if you had a good version of Scythe Tiger, or just another Nicottle. The fact of the matter is Experiment 1 is a wild Nicottle often that also has regeneration. That's crazy. It doesn't die. If you have just a 3/3 Experiment 1 and a 3/3 Wild Nicottle, Experiment 1's a better Wild Nicottle. It's hard to fathom, but it is. And that's just something to consider here. And then Kytheon is also a great example. Kytheon is a 2/1, so it's not that great. Not like we haven't not used Savannah Lions before. But the big thing is it flips, and when it flips, it turns into a 4/4. So it grows. And its flip is remarkably easy in a Slay archetype. You can usually do it on turn 3. Sometimes you have to wait till turn 4 to do it. Regardless, it's always good. Anyone who's played with this card in Standard knows what I'm talking about. It also has built-in protection, so it's not a bad top deck later on. It gains Indestructible. It can block forever if you need to. Not that you want to be on that end, but when you flip it, you get some more abilities out of it. It's not just a 4/4 that's indestructible, which, by the way, is great. If someone told you you could play an indestructible Lexidon Smiter for 1 mana, you'd be like, that's broken. And that's what that is. It's broken. You just need to support it, which currently Zoo can't support it because it doesn't have the Scythe Tiger slot. It turns into a 4/4. It can make big things attack it so that the rest of your creatures can attack through. It can also play a little aggro control in terms of if you're playing against another faster aggro deck, which the Zoo archetype should and could and should do. So it's got a bunch of different abilities to it. The fact is that you can also give something indestructible and untap it for a blocker. It fits the archetype perfectly, yet is undersupported because there is still nothing to fill that one slot. Until you fill that one slot, the Scythe Tiger 4-of slot, you have not a good Experiment 1. You have Wild Nacatl, who's great. It's the best 1-drop you can play in Modern if you're playing green. And you've got Kythian, who's also great. You just don't have this slot filled, which is a huge, huge hole in this archetype. Moving on, you're also going to then see that you're going to want at least 7 2CMC creatures to beat down with. I've got Fleecemane Lion as a good example here. Fleecemane Lion, again, isn't a good card. Tarmogoyf works in this slot, but it's not that great in this deck. It's usually a 2/3 that has protection from Bolt, which is good, but not great. What Zoo would like to see is something like a Fleecemane Lion whose ability for going monsters cost 3 instead of 5. 5 is outrageous. You'll never do it in the archetype. But it's a good example of what Zoo wants to do, which is have a 3/3 for 4 mana, maybe a 3/3 for 2 mana, maybe a 3/4 for 2 mana that can gain protection on its own so it doesn't die and get stronger because of it. This being a 4/4 indestructible hexproof would make it crazy if it just cost 3 mana to activate. Slay archetypes, this is a good example to talk about while we're here. Slay archetypes do gain virtual card advantage. It's one of the good reasons you'd run a Slay archetype, because it does gain virtual card advantage. What is virtual card advantage? It's not real card advantage, but what it does is it puts your opponents at odds. So either they can't do a clean 1-for-1, or they do a 1-for-1, but it costs them way more to do a 1-for-1 than it does for, like, the normal way to do it. Stuff like this, gaining Monstrous and being able to, like, deny them a Bolt is card advantage. By threatening the ability to do it, and they're not playing the Bolt to kill this now, it would also be card advantage, because you're stranding a card in their hand. Thalia is also a great example of this. Thalia is actually an amazing Slay Zoo archetype card. And you have to play around it a little bit, but it really doesn't harm you all that much, because she's either going to die against the decks that need to get rid of her, so that way they can get rid of the rest of your stuff, or that delays the game long enough that it doesn't matter that you're paying an extra 1 mana for your Bolt to finish them off. They're dead. So she's a great example of something you can do, and a good example as to why you're in white in the first place. Again, it's that idea that you're putting your opponents a little off balance. You are tempoing them a little bit, but it's a proactive tempo is the important thing here. And realistically, you need to gain card advantage, virtual card advantage somehow with this archetype. And the way that you did it in the past was things like Grim Lavamancer, or back in there, the Brothers of Fire, where you would go ahead and basically do bad Grim Lavamancering. It's how you would gain virtual card advantage. Reusable abilities like that, and this, which is a static ability, Fleecemane Lion's ability, Grim Lavamancer and things we'll get to in a second. Reusable advantage like that is important. It doesn't necessarily need to be card draw. It can be virtual card advantage. Just mana efficiency, mana sinks are a good example of it. Moving right along, the last part that you're going to want to do, and by the way, on the 2CMC slot, it doesn't necessarily have to have Hexproof or something. Voice of Resurgence is also a pretty good card for this archetype because it attacks, it's honest in its attacking, and then when it dies, it gives you something that's still great afterwards. That's also a good example of something that you can do. Hearthstone has a lot of that in Hearthstone Zoo, where you're just making it an unclean trade, and Voice of Resurgence does something similar to that. But you want to lean more towards Fleecemane Lion things because it's got more beef on the front end and then makes it unclean later. So that's what I would suggest. The last slot here is Woolly Thoktar in 3CMC. Woolly Thoktar, not a good card, again. But it's kind of express as an example. A better version that would be not in these colors, that's a perfect example, would be Geist of Saint Draft. Geist of Saint Draft is a perfect card for your 3 CMC slot. It wins the game on its own if it's unchecked. It's hard to deal with. It's basically unkillable. Yes, you could block and kill it, but that's tough to do. And you still get damage in overhand. It's got like 4 damage trample. It is a great card. If you were to give Woolly Thoktar something like Savage Knuckleblade, where Savage Knuckleblade could be a little stronger, maybe on the front end where it's like a 5/4 or something. Maybe you do a Woolly Thoktar that has a bunch of different keywords that are in red, green, and white. Trample, lifelink, and haste. It would be redonk. It'd be great. It would be just what you need to finish off the game. So in your 3 CMC slot, you should have not just a creature that's strong, but one that's also going to win you the game. Now, Neither Reliquary kind of works here, but the problem is you can't always control Knights. Size. They can grave hate you, which is another problem with Goyf, and also a problem with Grim Lavamancer and Ooze. These are all things that I'm not a huge fan of in Zoo. I know that over time you become more extension graveyard as part of your game, but if you can be not part of the graveyard, it actually benefits you more in the sideboard in Modern. That's a whole another topic for another day. But the important thing here that I'm trying to say is that your 3 CMC slot should just win the game on its own. You shouldn't have to worry too much about your opponents being able to, like, Ooze, eat your lands, and then your Knight is pretty useless. Knight also plays much better for, like, Bant decks. I mean, she is from Bant, but Bant decks or decks that are able to toolbox their lands more. And we're not really caring to toolbox our land in a Slay Zoo archetype. Our lands really are only there to cast things. That's it. You just want them to be, like, reliable and not get yourself mana screwed or color screwed at any point in time. If you were going to do anything with your lands, you might run a Wasteland, because Wastelands will keep the game in the short term, which benefits you as the aggro deck, and as well as checks other lands, or Kessig Wolfrun, because it's a mana sink, and like I said, sometimes you just got to gain virtual card advantage by having mana sinks like that. So those would be the only 2 cards I'd ever consider putting in a Zoo archetype. One of them also is a Modern legal. So that's what I'm going to talk about for the 1 CMC, 2 CMC, 3 CMC creatures. However, let's talk about these board clear spells. Now, again, we're going to get back into what I was talking about with some of these creatures later, but we're going to start off with the easy ones. Lightning Bolt is Lightning Bolt. It ends the game if it hits your opponent's face. You can use it to be aggressive if there's no creatures on board, and if there's a creature on board, you probably can take care of it with Lightning Bolt. Anything that's not in Lightning Bolt's alley, that's fine. You just bolt the face then, right? And if it's too big to deal with a Lightning Bolt, well, you've got your backup. It's Path here. Path is less important, because Path lets you get rid of Wormcoil engines and stuff really into sort of your mid-game, which is your late game. So you don't run it as a 4 of, you run it as a 3 of. Lastly, on this slot here, we've got a Tarkus Command. Now, Tarkus Command is great. Anyone who's played Tarkus Command knows the power of a Tarkus Command. Specifically if you're running a lot of 1-drops, which Zoo is. Every mode here, every single one, supports Zoo. Opponents can't gain life this turn. Zoo wants that. Zoo used to play Flames of the Blood Hand back in the day. This is better than that. This is something Zoo wants. Deals 3 damage to each opponent. Sure, why not? You want to bolt. It's aggressive. At worst, you're doing something and bolting. Puts a land into the battlefield. May not seem like it, but you might want it with things like Kessig Wolfrun, or if you're running Wastelands, it becomes more relevant. It's not the best plan in the world, but it's there. It's okay. Lastly, creatures you control get 1/1 reach till end turn. Yeah, exactly. That's what you want to do. It's great. It's protection against things when you're attacking with a Kytheon too. You want to be aggressive, so this thing you can play at any point in time and is very good. You can play it as a reactive spell. You can play it as a proactive spell. It's just great. Why is it a 3 of? Just because that fits the mana curve better for what we're doing here. I like to have 3 of a Tarkus Command and 2 of the Gore Clan Rampager. We'll get to that in a second. Let's actually get to it right now. In to fill out your 1 converted mana cost spell here for your clear spells, you have 8 to 9. Grim Lavamancer is a 2 of. That's sort of the sweet spot. You never really wanted to have 3 Grim Lavamancers. It always seems like overkill. You draw 1 too many. 2 is where you wanted to be in a 60 card deck. I've known this since like the beginning of Modern. It's just 2 is the correct number if you're ever going to put it in a main deck. And Grim Lavamancer is key to it being an actual good Slay build, because it does what it needs to do. It deals damage and clears things. Otherwise, it's aggressive on an opponent's face. It gives you the flexibility you need. It gives you that virtual card advantage to burn things out. This is, again, one of the other reasons why I don't love Neither Reliquary in a Slay type build of Zoo, because you're eating your graveyard, and you need that for Goyf, you need that for Ooze, you need it for Neither Reliquary. It's one of the reasons why I don't love those cards in this deck. Realistically, this card is great, and it's replaced the cards that were in there before. There's another card that's like this, we'll get to it in a sec, after Gorklan. Gorklan Rampager, I've got it here. It's not a 4... You'll look at my curve here on the side, and you'll realize it's not there. There's no 4 converted mana cost, because I don't count this as a 4 converted mana cost. This counts as a 2 converted mana cost. You 90% of the time will pay for 2. 10% of the time, you'll pay it for 4. Is it a great card at 4 mana cost? No, certainly not. But if you literally have been getting bolted out of your life, then yeah, it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly reasonable for at that rate, because they've only got so much removal, and you can then say, hey, my pump spell is also a creature, worse comes to worse. Gorklan is great. It's a 3 of or a 2 of, it's never a 4 of. But Gorklan does its job. It clears the board, and it clears the board efficiently too, because if something blocks this creature, not only does it save the creature from dying via pump, or at worst, there's no creature there, and you just pump it, and it does tremendous amounts of damage, Boros charm amounts of damage, but it also tramples over. Yes, do you have to be worried about 2-for-1s? Absolutely. If you're a good Zoo player, though, you know when to use the Gorklan Rampager. You force them in a catch-22. You either use the bolt, and I have the gore, or you don't. Or I let you kill something earlier, and I have a gore in my hand, now you think you're free, and then I gore over things. It's just kind of important to know how to play that dance. Regardless, Gorklan Rampager is actually a good card, not one of these filler cards that I'm putting in here. At 3 CMC, because you'll notice, yeah, I do talk about 3 CMC board clears. I'm saying you should have at least 2 to 3 of them. And Domri Raid is actually very good. Why is Domri Raid good? It's a repeatable burn. You can burn once with it, do some card advantage, burn again. Domri Raid gives you this rare thing where if it's out there and it's not answered because they're too busy dealing with what's on board, you will win the game. It's a ticking time bomb. It is kind of like Liliana of the Veil, but the aggro version, and the reason why we never see it is because, like I told you, there's gaping holes in this archetype. It's not good right now. But Domri Raid is great in this archetype, if it existed. Domri Raid +1 with 28 creatures by using the tricks with Gorklan Rampager and Grim Lavamancer, while also playing nice with Thalia. Not with Thalia out, then casting it, but finding Thalia. You will hit. You will hit 2/3 of the time, which is better than you're going to do in this color scheme than normal, anyways. While maintaining aggressive, because it's a threat that's building up to an ultimate that will eventually win you the game. Its fight is great too. You often can do things like do the Kythian thing, flip it, have a 4/4 indestructible attack, and then Gorklan Rampager. Or sorry, Domri Raid killing something else. Or Domri Raid killing something else prior to the attack, and then you're forcing them in really bad chumps now. Plus his thing, this creature untaps and becomes indestructible till end of turn. Cool. Suddenly your Wild Mikado can kill a bunch of things. And it's repeatable. That's, again, what I was talking about by virtual card advantage. It's repeatable. So you're gaining 2-for-1s off of your Atarka's command. You're gaining 2-for-1s or more off of your Domri Raid. You're gaining 2-for-1s off of your Grim Lavamancer. Your Gorklan Rampager isn't technically a 2-for-1, but kind of is, because you're killing a creature, saving your creature, and you're killing a creature, saving a creature, and doing damage. So it's kind of it's like more of like a 1.5-for-1. So Thalia will give you virtual card advantage by forcing them to play around things. Fleecemane Lion type of card, again, Fleecemane Lion, not good, will also gain you virtual card advantage by the threat of its abilities. Woolly Thokjar does not gain you card advantage, but, technically, you can get card advantage off of a Geist of Saint Traft. I'm not saying splashing blue in it is your best bet, because, again, you want your lands to be pretty solid. Just 20 lands, producing color. Maybe you run 2 of utility lands is the most I think I'd run 2 to 3 of. In that, I would only do Wasteland or Keswick Wolf Run. So that's why the archetype... This is what would make a good archetype to me. It would make a good archetype if we solve these cards. But we're missing some support card. The big one that we're missing is a Scythe Tiger-esque Wild Nacatl card. A card that's could be as strong as Wild Nacatl. Maybe you have to build it up to it. That's fine too. But with some built-in protection, like it gets Shroud. Another card that would be something like that is Wild Mongoose at 1 mana. But yeah, something that lets you get some built-in protection on that creature. Wild Nacatl's great. I'm not going to say Wild Nacatl's bad. Wild Nacatl is fantastic. It's the best thing you can do at 1 mana in green, aside from a Noble Hierarch. And Noble Hierarch gets used in the Zoo archetype, but that's not because it's good Slay building, it's because it's just... There's holes in this archetype, as you can see, and they try to fill it with something. You'll see no Kirdape. Kirdape used to be good. Kirdape is no longer good. It's a 2/3. That's it. So it's just a worse Nacatl. And 2/3s will not end you the game sooner than a 3/3 will. You just would rather play a 3/3. 3 damage also is this sort of like lovely area that you want to be at, because 3 damage will mean that you are better playing this because it's a repeatable bolt. If not, then you're just playing a bad shock, and that's not super great. Kytheon kind of gets the nudge over that, because Kytheon then becomes a 4/4 and will make up for its damage that it's lost earlier, plus it has utility elsewise, plus it also has built-in card protection. So again, the Scythe Tiger 4-of slot, you've got 4 slots in this deck that just don't exist. There's nothing good to put in there. You could put a Kirdape in there, but it's a bad card. So you're filling a empty slot with filler bad cards that don't exist. It's not a good card. Fleecemane Lion. This is another slot. It's a 4-of 2 converted mana cost, beat down / don't die / put your opponents at odds slot. At 4 mana, it should be beating down pretty hard. It should be beating at least above 3 while not dying. That's why Goyf gets used, because Goyf doesn't die to Bolt, but Goyf dies to a bunch of other things. Plus, Goyf can be a little, let's just say it blankly, not the best card in Zoo, because either it's okay or it's shitty. It's there because of necessity, because this slot, where Fleecemane Lion would be if it had a good monstrous cost, does not exist. And if at any point in time they print maybe even just a straight 3/4 for 2 mana, that's something you can look at filling in. If it's a 3/4 with 2 mana that says discard a card, or pay X amount of mana in order for it to gain indestructible till end turn, something like that, hexproof, or something that says like, if this is targeted by an opponent, it deals 3 damage to them, or if any of your creatures are targeted by an opponent, deal 3 damage to them, then it would be worth looking at. Like, it needs to have some way to be dealing a fair amount of damage while simultaneously having some things that put your opponent on edge and not able to cleanly remove it. Voice of Resurgence, again, also is a good thing, but not quite buff enough on its front end. Paying 2 mana for 2 damage is not so great. Then you have a hole here in your 3-mana converted mana slot, and it's a 3-of. You just don't really have any good creatures for it yet. I'm sure they will print a good creature. It's not like Wizards is not printing mid-range creatures in 3 colors for 3 mana that are bad. They just missed us completely when they did their things. The closest we have is Savage Knuckleblade or Geist of St. Traft, both which don't work. Geist of St. Traft, by the way, originally was supposed to be like a white-green creature that when it tapped put a 4/4 trampling Rhino into play. That would be something mentioning for this. But yeah, we'll get this one eventually. I'm not too surprised by this. It seems like we might get something like this eventually. They have printed Kythian, they have printed Experiment 1. They've dabbled with 1 converted mana cost cards that turn into 3/3s in the past. We got a recent Delirium 1 plus a couple other options. It's not a possibility. So we might get it. And as far as the two converted mana cost slot, we might actually get something here too. Grim Flayer exists, and that's something sort of in this kind of design space, just in the wrong color. So again, we're inching closer towards it, but we're not quite there. You need to fill, I'd say, before even looking at this, you'd need to fill that 1 converted mana cost slot and that 2 converted mana cost slot. And then 3 converted mana cost slot you can kind of fill in with Knight of the Reliquary and get away with it. It's not the greatest, but you kind of can. If you can fill that 1 converted mana cost slot, the 2 converted mana cost slot here, and the 3, this archetype would be great. Let me talk to you guys what it's been like playing Dredge as a tier 1 deck. First off, I'm just going to say this straight out. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me. Dredge is not good enough to ban anything from. It's a good tier 1 deck. It's not so good that you should ban something from it to make it worse. I know people are a lot of salty playing against it, but it's just, it folds itself a lot. I'm not going to get into it. By playing it a lot, I know that it's a good tier 1 deck, but nothing more. Now, what it's been like playing a tier 1 deck. I've mostly lived my entire life playing tier 2. I've been playing Zoo for the entirety of Modern. And I got tired of losing, I'll admit, and it took years for me to get to that point, but I got to that point where I just decided, you know what, I don't want to lose anymore. It's crappy trying to go this uphill battle. I enjoy doing an uphill battle, but I also don't like the fact that I feel like I'm short every time. That every time I would look at my sideboard and I would say I'm 5 cards short. I just don't have the ability to deal with everything. And I'm not saying that Modern, you need to be a format where you need to deal with everything, but the fact of the matter is I should be good against control decks, and I should be good against tempo decks. And when a tempo deck can bolt me and then bolt my creatures out and then put out a Tassiger and I'll never win the game, that's not a great feeling. And when the control decks can just wrath me for 3 mana and then just sit on card advantage, that's not a great feeling either, especially Bolt, Snap, Bolt. These decks should lose to aggro decks, but they don't. Well, not all of them. At least they don't lose to Zoo, and it's because Zoo is lacking in its power. Its main deck is just not structured in a way that it can deal with the decks it needs to win against while simultaneously leaving room in its sideboard to deal with other things. I shouldn't have to pack Boros Charm in my sideboard because if I get swept and I lose the game. That shouldn't be a thing for Zoo. It should have some built-in resilience. Dredge has the built-in resilience. Infect has built-in resilience. Affinity has built-in resilience. Suicide Zoo has built-in resilience. All of these decks have built-in resilience that they can rely on speed and having open sideboard slots. Hell, even some open mainboard slots. Dredge can, in fact, run around 2 to 3 flex spots in its main board that it can toolbox and get to eventually. Things like Dark Blast, things like Gnaw to the Bone. That's not something you can do in Zoo, and it sucks because you're either forcing yourself to be completely aggressive and then you lose because you don't have the gas, or you're forcing yourself to be proactive, hate like Thalia and things, and then you lose because you don't have the aggression and you don't have the speed. So again, that's why I'm trying to explain what these reasonings are as to why Zoo is not in a great place right now, and what it can be done to fix. Now, I did a lot of research prior to making this video, and this is the best I can come up with. This is literally the best I can come up with, based off of years of experience, knowing what the Naya color pie has to offer, owning every single staple in the Naya color pie for Modern. It's got holes. And once these holes get plugged, it's a tier 1 deck. I can guarantee you, what I'm showing you right now, with a better versions of the 3 cards I said need to exist, would be a tier 1 deck. I can guarantee you that. And that if you wanted to play Zoo then, you'll see a bunch of people jumping on the bandwagon. I think it would also help a lot if it didn't play Goyf, because then more people would play it. But regardless of that statement, those are the holes, and this is how you fix it. I know it's not a great uplifting video, but I'm just trying to give some knowledge, at least some lasting knowledge, to the mostly Mtgsalvation thread, Zoo thread, that they can look forward to. Now, I want to leave you with a little bit of optimism. Dredge was a bad archetype a year ago. 1 year ago. Just 1 year ago. Dredge was basically unplayable, because it had holes in it that were not able to be fulfilled. And those holes were the fact that you needed to play a lot of creatures in order to make Vengevine good, and Vengevine was kind of taking the spot of Ichikar. And so that was basically a hole that was being filled itself by something that wasn't super great. That it didn't have good ways to get dredging going, and it just didn't have good ways to get dredging going. Just a lot of good ways to get dredging going. It just didn't have any of them. It had Faithless Looting, and that was about it. You had to play Hedron Crab or Tomb Scour in order to make it good. So it filled those holes with different things. Vengevine, Hedron Crab, Tomb Scour, things like that, in order to try to be a good deck, and failed at it. Now, bear in mind, I'm talking a year ago. Troll was unbanned, so they had access to it. It wasn't like that Troll made Dredge good all of a sudden. Troll made Dredge better, sure, in the same way that Wild Nakatl unbanned made Zoo better. It was still a bad deck because of it. Now, notice what I said. It was lacking 2 probably spells, really good ways to get dredging going, plus something good to be dredged out of the graveyard. It got those. It got a prized Amalgamate, it got Insolent Neonate, and it got Cathartic Reunion. Why? Because Madness was a thing that was being pushed in that current standard block. All we really need to do is go back to Naya. I honestly think that's going to fix your problem right there. It's just go back to Naya. Just go back to Naya, or maybe even Ravnica. Ravnica's got some good options that Zoo has been pulled on from for years. Watchwolf-esque kind of thing. Go back to Naya. Watch how quickly there will be a Naya 3-drop. Watch how quickly you will have a push 2-drop. Watch how quickly, because they're going to give Naya the aggro tools, because Naya is the aggro color pie of that plane, there will be a good 1-drop. And suddenly, this deck is totally playable. And if it's not going to be playable because of Naya, the block, it might be playable because the one before it will have things that will support Naya, and the one after it will also have things that support Naya. So all you need to do is get to this point where they sit down, they say, alright, we're going to make a focus on 3-color decks, and one of them has to be the aggro deck. It's Boros deck plus green. Okay, Naya deck is going to be the one. At any point in time, if they, as a design team, decide that's the route to go, you will see this deck become tier 1. I'm confident in my years and years and years of Magic playing that that's the option. So hopefully that leaves you with some knowledge and a little bit of optimism. I'm sorry it's not the greatest news in the world and I can't explain. I've broken the code. I've broken the Da Vinci Code and here it is. But this is as close as I can get it to feeling like a tier 1 deck. Now the deck, again, I'm showing you, is a bad deck. Don't play this. But that's your option. Something that looks kind of like this, with Scythe Tiger replaced, with Fleecemane Lion replaced, with Woolly Thoktar replaced, and suddenly you have an amazing deck in front of you. Thank you guys. Keep playing Zoo if you guys love playing Zoo. And remember to always feed the animals.